Hey everybody, this is Eric Rousseau with the Comedy Film Festival. I'm joined today by filmmakers and actors from our More Than Just a Funny Face block of short films. Today we are joined by John Gholson from Don't Buy The Liverwurst, an actor extraordinaire, and Andrew Neylon from Dirty Laundry, writer and director. Thank you both for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You know, one of the things I'm interested really with both of y'all is, this block is called More Than Just a Funny Face. And, we've got these different kind of themes that we try to do all throughout. But with this, there's something that the comedy is balancing with. And I think for both of y'all, it just so happens to be a little bit more of like the drama. So John, I'd love to start with you, especially from an acting perspective. I know obviously you were who Nathaniel Hendricks, the writer and director, had in mind when writing this. I know that there are a few things, even from the writing side, that you helped to give some advice on, helped to craft. But finding that balance of comedy and, in this case, drama. There's also, this biting, dark kind of like satire that is just so relevant to the character that you play. Talk a little bit about finding that balance for your character.
I think sometimes, like, I'm trying to avoid sounding too actorly about it. So you see, like, right off the bat, I'm like, I don't know that I see there as being like a big difference. I don't see there as being like okay, now I have a comedic role, so time for me to be a funny clown, versus like I have a dramatic role, like time for me to like study up and learn how to like cry on command, like that kind of thing. I think it's just in this project, like so many others, it's just a matter of, do you believe it, and letting the edit or the relatability find the comedy from the text itself, and not necessarily me trying to like wacky it up or funny it up or do something that I think is particularly funny. There were certainly suggestions that I had that related more to how to approach certain places of emotional tension within the film, to try to as an actor, if I felt like something tonally was at odds with my truth. Again, I don't want to sound all actorly about it, but if there's anything at odds, like tonally with my truth on set, where it was like feeling one way or the other, I think we all kind of felt it. And again, Nathaniel was open to suggestions on how to move that needle in a way that didn't betray what was going on. But in regards to approach, like, even if I'm doing something that is intentionally funny, my goal for me is never to be like, can I funny it up? My goal is like, can I believability it up? Even if it's like playing an absurd character or something like that, it's like, do you believe it? Have I committed to the bit? That's the question, right? And whether it's drama, comedy, whatever, like that's a far, far distant fourth or fifth place to the number one thing being, do I commit to the bit? Do you buy this reality? Do you believe in who this person is? Even if they're grounded, if they're wacky, does it feel truthful in whatever way that means for the material? I feel like I'm still struggling for an answer to that question.
I think you did a great job.
Okay.
I think
All right. Okay.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, leaning into just like, is this believable? Is that, is this relatable? And I think that the biggest thing that you kind of, mentioned, and I appreciate kind of your perspective, is like, there's this idea of, for comedy, kind of like winking or like playing into the joke. And I know for like things that I've done, like I've definitely been guilty of it. I've definitely been guilty of directing people kind of towards that way. And it's really, I think sometimes it's the easier way to go, but like just no matter what the world is, no matter what the character is, kind of like living in the reality of that is so important to, I think, selling the bit. So
yeah. Well, I mean, even look at like your film with Doug. It's like Doug is believable, and then you cast Doug because he's believable, and you knew that Doug was going to be funny if he made that world feel believable, right? So like there's not a moment where there's a chink in Doug's armor where you're like, oh, I see that this is all an act and this is all phony, you know. And Doug kind of lives that way anyways, where you kind of can't tell how much is a bit and how much is actually like him, and that's why we love Doug, right? But yeah, I just wanted to point it out as being evident in some of the stuff that you've worked on, and we cross paths on that movie too. And again, it's a case of like, you know, I have one line in in Lucky Doug, but it goes back to that idea of like, that line wasn't necessarily like, let me make this funny. The scene is funny. Like, the scene's already funny. I don't have to make it funny. I have to make it believable.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And for those that aren't aware, John is referring to a movie that I co-wrote and directed called Lucky Doug, that John had a scene-stealing performance in. We constantly get that feedback. Where I
want more of the boardroom guy. Where's the executive? Where did he go? Is that what you hear?
Yeah, absolutely. People are constantly just like I mean, I saw it live in theaters with people, and there were, you know, near cheers when you stand up and say that line. And I don't want to spoil it because it does end up being like a pivotal moment. But no, it's you know, to everything you're saying, I both appreciate it, and obviously I see it in your work. Andrew, I want to kind of, you know, similar question to you, you know, and going into Dirty Laundry, you know, we're kind of like finding that balance. And this is I think leans heavy into, you know, whether we want to call it dramedy, which I know some people don't like that term, dramatic comedy. You know, for you, where was that kind of like finding the line? And, you know, you're coming from it from the other perspective, the writer director perspective.
Yeah, I think for me, well, one, dramedy, not a dark word, or not a dirty word, you know, to me. Like, I've always been fine with that. And, you know, I mean, there's a reason I feel like the theater masks, you know, it's like the smiling one and the sad one. Like, there's a reason that they're next to each other, I guess. And so I had done some narrative and some documentary work before making this, but I think in our other panel I mentioned, you know, this is the first narrative short that I made while I was at UT for my MFA. So, you know, in a lot of ways, I feel like I was still finding my style, the short film that I'd made before this as well, that kind of like helped, that I did when I was in my undergrad, and I would say kind of helped get me into the program in the first place. There was also one line of dialogue in it, or one word, actually, both one word and one line. But so I didn't really have that much experience writing for characters talking, and, you know, so I decided I'd go from a, you know, one line and one word to a film that, you know, is, like I said before, almost like a monologue. It's like all this, so I'm slowly building up. But I think for me, you know, if I look at the other films that I made after that and sort of what I gravitate towards naturally, it's like, you know, the common through line is definitely family drama. And, you know, most of these other family dramas that I would do after this, you see more of the family members. They're, you know, more off screen, or they're on the phone in this instance. But for me, you know, in terms of searching my own, you know, identity, experiences, and, you know, I do stand-up comedy now, and this is also a major part of my stand-up material, is, you know, family is very much a part of it. I was an only child. So just when you don't have a lot of other people to interact with, you know, your parents, et cetera, like, make a really large impact on you. And so in that regard, I think that kind of influenced the material that I would make. But also, yeah, for me, I mean, you know, dramedy is definitely a word you could use for it. I think a lot of the time that I spent, you know, working on this film, and then after, dark comedy is normally how I would think of it. I definitely agree with John in terms of like this notion of, you know, I think you hear people say sometimes that, you know, it's often looked at, and I did competitive speaking. I was on the speech team for 6 years in high school and college. And, you know, in that realm, they have like humorous interpretation and dramatic interpretation. And if you do duo, it can be either. So, you know, I did dramatic interpretation mostly through those years. And so I think I just naturally always gravitated towards drama. But even in a dramatic performance, there's usually some funny moments. And sometimes a joke in a drama where there's only maybe 3 or 4 jokes in a 10-minute dramatic performance, sometimes those jokes hit harder than comedic performances where they're trying to like hit you with a joke every 10, 15, 30 seconds or whatever. So I think I kind of took that along with it, and, you know, definitely agree with John in the sense of like the most important part being like, you know, is it grounded? And I feel like advice I would get from like acting teachers along the way and stuff like that was like, the conventional wisdom is that drama is, you know, more prestigious, or it's more, you know, in the Oscars and stuff, you know, there's a lot of discourse about like what gets chosen and things as an example. But I think that a lot of my acting teachers along the way would tell me like in some ways comedy can be more difficult because you're not suddenly you're usually not totally stripped from a duty to make it grounded or make it believable, or a lot of times, you know, that's where the humor comes from. And certainly in Dirty Laundry, I mean, I was a first-year graduate student living in Austin. I'd never lived that far south or that far west. So, you know, somebody told me at some point that laundry-related films, for those like first narrative films, are somewhat common because having to wash your clothes, it's like a very grad school problem. It's a very relatable problem. And, you know, a lot of that, I think, you're in a new place and you're getting used to it, and you have a lot of work to do, and so you're very attuned to just like things going wrong. And so that film in a lot of ways too, you know, just in terms of like comedy of errors, that's a lot of what I think about there is, you know, it's sort of a film where a person is consistently blocked in getting the thing that they want, and that, you know, it can be over the top, but it's also a very realistic thing that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I think that was kind of a driving engine of a lot of the comedy in there, and then sort of peeling back the layers. I mean, you say like more than a funny face, and I guess like for this character, a lot of the dramatic tension is that they're supposed to want to go be a performer and be funny, but there's all the stuff going on in the background. So I think that's kind of the journey for that character in the short film.
For sure, absolutely, and I mean Angelina Martin, what a performance there, and just, you know, it is so much in the face, so much in the reaction, and I think you mentioned this when we spoke before of, you know, for both of these movies, it's a little bit unique because you know, they do have other characters, but they're both very focused on our protagonist. To the point where there are moments where it's like it's almost near monologue, right? So it's really cool, and I think to that, you know, Andrew, you learned a little bit in talking to you about, you know, how you have now done some live performing, and it just so happens that that's something that is a part of John's acting as well. So what I'd really like to touch on here is, you know, how is it, you know, John, let's go back to you. You know, you I think I first met you, I believe, through doing live performance, you know, comedy in Austin, going into it, especially for this type of role, somebody who is a, you know, satirical musician. You know, are there any kind of tools that you've picked up along the way that, you know, are really like key and helpful from the live performance aspect that maybe helped out in this role in particular?
I mean, the past 10 years, I've been performing. I mean, going back, like, yeah, I did theater in college, and like I actually did it. My mom was a theater major, so I was around when I was a little kid and around stages and stuff like that. And I remember doing like Oedipus Rex as like the kid that leads the blind prophet around the stage when I was like 8 years old, and then the next season doing Antigone and being like the town crier was like single digit age. So whatever the barrier is for comfort was like I cleared that a long time ago, where I can't even remember what that felt like for the first time. I mean, I think that there has to be a certain level of if people talk about like fearless actors and things like that, and I'm not a fearless actor, but I think a path to becoming a fearless actor is being, you have to be assured in yourself, and it doesn't necessarily mean self-assured, because you can still have things that you don't like about yourself at all. So I'm not even talking about the elimination of those things. I'm talking about the comfort to present those things. I'm talking about like, yeah, I'm not perfect and I can't do everything well. My knees are contractured, so I walk with a limp, and I know that that's going to be recognizable when somebody sees me. And like those things that I have that are imperfections, what is my own comfort level with them as an actor? And I think that that's been maybe the discovery over the past 10 years has been an increased amount of assuredness and sort of like knowing who I am. Does that make sense? And I think it puts me on a nice trajectory towards the fearlessness that maybe someday I will achieve. But I think you have to get there. You can't. You can't command a performance space consistently without a good understanding, a good handle on who you are and what that all means.
Absolutely, and that makes complete sense. Yeah, Andrew, kind of, in a similar way, and I know that you just mentioned that it was something where doing some kind of stage performance has been something you've been doing since you're in high school. So also from a younger age, but now you have taken that turn and you're also doing stand-up, much like your character. Where did that come in? Was that something that happened before making Dirty Laundry? Was that during? Was it after? It obviously seems like, obviously the speech, there's a relation there, but it seems like it was at least on your mind somewhere throughout Dirty Laundry.
Yeah, it does seem that way, doesn't it? This sort of, yeah, I don't know. That's such a, it's very interesting because I was talking to somebody about this. I think probably a little bit prompted by doing like the last panel that we did. And I was talking to somebody about it, about the short film, and about how, I wrote this thing where this person's like, got a show, and part of the sort of like, it was that there's all these like text messages on screen and stuff like that, and a lot of that was really influenced, I don't know if either of you have seen this show, but a lot of that was influenced by High Maintenance, the HBO show. And High Maintenance did a lot of sort of contemporary, like, oh, we're going to have texts on screen, type of stuff, and also is another show that really tonally walks a wild balance of like, there are hilarious episodes, there are dramatic and heartfelt episodes, and often you might get that all in the same episode. So I probably would not have gone to film school for a graduate degree without that show coming out both on Vimeo as a web series and then later on HBO. But yeah, it definitely was on my mind. But it's funny because I was telling somebody, I wrote this kind of thing where, so much of it rests on this person. They've got a show that they're supposed to go to, and they're getting these texts, somebody wants them to be there, and their friends aren't going to make it, and all this sort of stuff. And, I mean, I'd had, versions of things sort of like that, but it's kind of funny because it's like, again, I had not really had that exact experience. And I had a show that I did last night that not one-to-one, but basically mirrored many of the things that happened in that. So it's like, I sort of am like, in a way, for whatever it's worth, it's like, there's a lot of discourse with writing. And before I ever did like any screenwriting or anything like that, I went to school for English literature and was kind of more interested in prose when I was younger, and really thought that's what I was going to be doing was writing in a more like, I guess, narrative fiction sort of way. And there's a lot of discourse, people talk a lot about this idea of write what you know. And, so you'll get a lot of write what you know. And I feel like write what you know is like one of the most like bandied about like phrases, and for good reason in a way, like there's a lot of value to it. But in doing a lot of like reading interviews with authors and things like that, occasionally you'd kind of see the other thing where people are like, actually, that's why you have an imagination. And that's why, doing research on something you don't know about, and, it doesn't always, have to be autofiction. It doesn't always have to be all about you. And so I was I was kind of trying to get to that in a way with some parts of this, you know, with like writing something that I didn't know fully. But it is kind of odd that it sort of loops back around. And then it becomes, it's sort of, I feel like I've sort of lived in reverse with this, where it's like, I didn't know it and I wrote it, but then in experiencing it more fully, I'm like, oh, okay, some of these things, like, I wasn't totally off about. But yeah, I was definitely always interested in comedy. And when I was living in Chicago before going to grad school, I worked a night job. So I look back now and there's part of me that goes, oh, I wish I'd started at that time. But my schedule really wouldn't have supported doing comedy more than just on the weekends, which maybe would have been better than nothing. But I mean, at this point, you know, it's a lifestyle in a lot of ways. And so I'm not really sure how much I would have gotten out of it if I'd started any earlier, which was kind of odd. But yeah, definitely always on my mind and kind of influenced by a lot of factors. I don't know that if this came up in our previous talk, but I'm also legally blind and totally colorblind. So I can't drive a car or anything like that. So, you know, being in Chicago, being able to get around and being able to get around in a place that has such a dense comedy scene, relatively speaking, like, you know, it was sort of like a right time, right place sort of thing for me. But yeah, it was very much on my mind. And I think at that time, I was maybe right around just starting to work at Fallout as well. So I had sort of, I was observing other people kind of living that lifestyle and some of what came along with that. So yeah, I guess it was just a seed that needed a little bit of time to grow, but here we are, you know, so that's always fun.
That's great. And for those that aren't aware, the Fallout that Andrew is referring to is Fallout Theater in Austin, Texas, which, funny enough, all three of us, as well as Nathaniel Hendricks, the writer-director of Don't Buy The Liverwurst, we all have connections to Fallout. The star of Dirty Laundry, Angelina Martin, she also has a connection to Fallout as well, with shows that happen there. As we kind of start to wrap things up a little bit, something that I've been really curious through these talks, through these panels, is kind of understanding some of the challenges that were presented, and, you know, where you kind of like met some of those head on, and, you know, where you leaned into some of them. You know, John, we talked a little bit about it, but this was a role that Nathaniel had in mind for you. There's a lot of elements to this. You know, you're mostly the only person on screen. It's there's a musical element, there's a singing element. What were challenges that you felt, and, you know, maybe what were some that you saw, you recognized, and maybe you and Nathaniel kind of leaned into?
I mean, there was so much. It's essentially like it's more or less like a 15-minute monologue. I mean, cutting down, it's probably, if the film is 16 minutes long, I probably talk for 12 of those minutes on nonstop. And I hate memorizing. That's just the truth of it. I hate memorizing dialogue. It's the most hypocritical piece of me as a writer, especially that writes sketches, and I have to tell people, like, so we have rehearsal tomorrow, and it's like, hey, everybody be off book, and I have to look at myself and go, like, would I be off book? I'm like, no, I wouldn't be off book. So I hate memorizing dialogue. You know, one of the fortunate things about us shooting in Oklahoma was I had a very, very, very long drive with which to study my dialogue and go over it. I had extensive rehearsals with Nathaniel, which really for me is it is the best way and the probably the least convenient way for me to learn my lines, is to actually just run them over and over. And before filming, Nathaniel probably came over to my house. God, I feel like it was at least 4. I want to say it was like a half dozen times that he came over and ran through scenes that we would act out in my living room, or even going over the songs. There were times we went over the songs so he could hear how I would sing the songs. My mom taught piano, and I never learned how to play piano, but when I was a kid, we had a piano in the house. And I played clarinet one year, and I realized that, if my clarinet lays on its side, the sequence of the notes is the same as the sequence on a piano. And so while I don't play piano, I could fake it as far as like movement enough to be able to pull off realistically that. And I've had people watch scenes and go like, "Oh, I didn't know you played piano." And it's like, oh, I'm not actually playing piano. Like I just know how people move their fingers. Like that's it. I'm just faking the actions that I saw my mother and her students do. So I think the biggest, like, I mean, beyond dialogue and stuff, there was some tricky stuff like I had to do for the very first time. And it's funny because in the film, I think it has, you could probably count to 2 and it's off the screen. Like it's like 1, 2, and then it's gone. But there's a scene where I make a drink while I'm talking, and I don't drink. And so I have never made a cocktail. And I have to make a complicated cocktail that involved like eggs, and there's like an order of events. And so on top of trying to memorize what I'm supposed to be saying about like the Kennedy assassination, I also am having to go like, okay, get the egg, crack the egg, do the this, take the this, pour the this amount, take the this. And there's like practiced accidents, like drop the egg, spill the egg, try to pick the egg up with my hand, throw the egg in the trash can. And it's like, that was the first time where I had, it's blocking, right? But like blocking at a small basement theater is like, you stand here and you stand here. You walk from the wall, you walk from the curtains. And it's like, it's so basic. And this was like, oh, you have a complex series of actions that a normal film might be called upon for you to do, you know, where it's like, but it was really, honestly, the first time in a movie. I've been pretty fortunate, you know, I've had films and TV projects before this short, but I've been fine just sitting there if people haven't called on me to do anything. And so it was, I like to, in my personal life, even like I'll see somebody make something with you, like cook something. Like like I think about the time I made fish and chips, which is I saw somebody make fish and chips and I was like, I'm going to see if I can make fish and chips. And then I made fish and chips. It was really complicated. And I was like, I'm never doing that again. But man, I made great fish and chips that one day. I have a thing for me where it's like, I like to kind of see if I can do the thing. And that was a case of me getting to go, okay, I can do that. So now if I'm ever called on to like, hey, I have to memorize this, but I also have to memorize a set of instructions. And both sets of memory need to be running like at the same time. The lines and the action and the order of those events. And they have to, timing wise, they have to align because I'm supposed to finish when the drink is done, right? So the timing of both of them has to dovetail. I can't get done talking and then still be making stuff. And I can't make the drink and then stand there with it in my hand while I continue to talk. Yeah, that was probably the biggest new challenge. I mean, meeting the tone of the material was a challenge that we worked out creatively on set, and I've already spoken about that some, but that was stuff where it was like problem solving in the moment, where we would do something and kind of feel like this isn't hitting the neighborhood that we want to hit, even though on the page it says this. Does it feel like that? And it's like, it kind of doesn't feel like that. So how do we problem solve for that? No, I don't find that stuff challenging. That stuff to me is really exciting and creatively exciting. That's why I really like doing that kind of thing. And then the other biggest challenge was it was booger bear hot in Oklahoma in July, and I had to wear a cardigan, and I was dripping sweat. And any excuse I could have to get rid of the cardigan, I was looking for the entire shoot. At one point, I was just like, can I just drape it over the couch? And I think if you watch the film now knowing that, you'll notice that in the second half, I don't wear the cardigan at all. I won my battle and got to put the cardigan on the couch.
It's so funny because as you're talking through this, I'm just like noting like, okay, yes, that is a Nathaniel Hendricks film trait. That is a Nathaniel Hendricks film trait. Like he loves a character with like verbosity, I think is the word, and like a, you know, just somebody who really just has a very specific way of talking and navigating through words.
Eric, that's my other role in Nathaniel's other film is I literally walk into somebody's house. So Nathaniel wrote and directed a feature with Spencer Lucas called Ultimate World. And my role in Ultimate World is I have a lengthy monologue. I walk into someone's house. I deliver this like long ass monologue and then leave. So yeah, Nathaniel's been saddling me with monologues. Maybe next time we'll give it like a silent one.
Yeah, who knows? And you know, for this one to meet it with like this complex kind of action on top of it. He's noted to me before he loves a sweaty film. I think those are his exact words. He says, I want to make a sweaty film, is what he said to me before. So I don't know if that was necessarily what he went into with Don't Buy the Liverwurst, but
yeah, no more sweaty films for me. I'm not good at sweaty films.
There you go. There you go. So Andrew, kind of similar question for you. You know, obviously being an MFA film, that alone, I mean, you're already getting pushed, you know, in certain ways. I think in our other panel, you talked a little bit about like this was one of a number of films that you were working on. It just so happened that this is the one that you were heading up. You know, tell us a little bit about that. You know, other challenges that that you encountered as you were navigating through Dirty Laundry.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as part of this process, your first year, you do what's called a KA and a KB. The KA is a documentary that's supposed to be like max 15 minutes. You do during your first semester. Then while you're doing that, you're writing the script for your KB, which is going to be your narrative film. For those narrative films, generally like under 10 minutes, I would say. But I feel like, you know, they were more like, they really wanted them to be more like in the like 8 to 9 minute range, which is not the length of this film. But at the time, you know, we were given like a little bit of flexibility, but even that was something like throughout the semester, I feel like there was like, you know, kind of like my classmates, like we were kind of like petitioning for like a little more flexibility in that regard. But yeah, so it's like you're writing in your first semester the short, and then you're kind of like making a decision on, you know, you're writing multiple shorts, and then you kind of pick the one that you're going to do. And then in addition to that, yeah, there were 12 of us. And so it was 2 groups of 6, and you rotate roles on each one. So, you know, you would be a producer, sound mixer, script supervisor, director, assistant director, and DP, and you would switch roles. We would all switch roles on each one. And that was essentially to teach you, give you some experience in all these different roles, and get these films made. So like the term boot camp, I think, is something that's thrown around a lot for the KB process. And you can probably imagine it's much loved and maligned for just, you know, because, you know, I think we can all agree on this. It's like, that's not a realistic way to make your film, you know, and you get to a certain point and you get to choose who you want to work with, you know, or sometimes you don't, but certainly like you're not, you know, there are people like, I'm legally blind and totally colorblind. I shouldn't be a script supervisor. You know, I'm supposed to tell you if that person was wearing that article of clothing before. Like, I can't tell, but I'm doing it for this process. So that, you know, that is its own thing. And, you know, that's one of those like, what you learn is maybe more valuable than like, you know, is every single part of the process totally logical, in my opinion. But so yeah, so that was a big challenge. You know, I was the only night shoot in our group. You know, so this laundromat was, for the original, we were all given 3 days as well. So that's the amount of time that you get. It was used over 3 nights. And then ultimately, I think I didn't mention this last time, but ultimately I did pickup. So I did 1 additional night, and it's actually kind of significant in a way. But yeah, so I mean, you know, I had somebody in my group who told me that they had never done an all-nighter before. And, you know, again, when we're talking about picking your crew, if somebody told me that beforehand and I was allowed to pick, I probably wouldn't pick that person. And that person probably wouldn't want to be picked, because that is just, I'm asking them to perform a role in a scenario that is like not how they live their life, you know? So that was an interesting one. But yeah, I mean, I think the big things were, yeah, so interestingly, the scenes, which I think are now like pretty pivotal and important, but like of Angelina performing comedy, were actually done as pickups. So that, which I feel like is, you know, kind of, you know, I don't know if makes the film is the right way to put it, but the film, you know, would and maybe did feel a little hollow without that, I think, because I remember when I was near the end of the production talking with my professor, and my professor was like, you know, maybe it would have made more sense if you had staged this at like in the green room of a comedy club or something like that, which okay, sure. It's the film had been shot at that point. So I'm like, now I think we're in the realm of wishful thinking, but what came out of that note and that discussion was, that it would have been that we're talking about all this comedy, but we're not seeing it, and that's not uncommon, especially in short films. We were, there are lots of instances where like a short film technique to deal with the constraints of finances and things of that nature is a little bit of tell, don't show sometimes, whether you like it or not. And that can be effective or not, but it did kind of produce this note of like, maybe there's a way we could get some comedy in here that just kind of sells you on that this person is a comedian, and it needed a little bit more action in that regard related to like this off-screen conceit. So that was done as a pickup, and yeah, I mean, especially as well having the constraint of just from writing to shooting, not picking my shoot dates to basically just being like, okay, we got a screen. I think about a month and maybe a week or two at most. After this was shot is when it screened. And, in that version, the opening, which has Angelina's character walking up to the laundromat, and it's like the only time besides the end kind of, it's really the only time you're outside. And you get a little bit of family context there that's like related to like that portion of the film, which is the sort of the drama of the dramedy. That wasn't in there. And I'd gotten a note from a professor very, very early on in the sort of like maybe rough cut phase of seeing that and being like, essentially like, I think this is taking too long. I don't think this is adding anything. There was a lot of pressure in that process to condense the short film down as much as possible for everyone, because they're trying to get you into this very much short and sweet and no extra details, minimal as possible, which again, like there's a lot of value to that because, much like comedy, like a big part of stand-up is shaving unnecessary parts off of a joke. So like, I definitely get it. But what's interesting is like in kind of pressure to conform and capitulate to some of these notes and, just kind of fit within the constraints of what they were wanting. When it popped out on the other side, it's like, it felt a little incomplete. And so that's why I ended up taking, amongst other things I was working on, kind of a considerable amount of time to do things like rescore the film, to, edit it and add in that opening that kind of gives you a little bit more context, but also like investment, in this person's family background and how that might be relevant to the comedy. So, again, like the whole point of this isn't to like critique or bash that process. I mean, that's why the film got made. But I will say that navigating those things of like, how do you take a note and, is this note really relevant? Like, is shorter always better? Or like, do you reach a point where it's so spare that you are missing real moments of like connection and investment? All of those were things that sort of had to just be, navigated. I think like, I won't say for good and bad, but I will say like, yeah, in some ways, some problems, like I didn't have a production designer. So I did all the production design myself. So it's like when you see that bag of laundry on the table, I put it there, but that's not a good thing. You know what I mean? That's like, ideally I would be working with someone else who would be like, we need a black trash bag, not a white one or something like that. But I wasn't there yet. So I guess my own inexperience in certain ways was a facet of that. But I think the good thing is by like trying to double down on the piece and not basically go, yeah, I think this is just like too flawed to work, or I think we're just not going to understand this. Is sort of like understanding like, yes, this pickup is going to help, because it really lets you invest in the character and it lets Angelina do what she does best in a way. And also some aspects of going like, by being okay with making it a little longer, is going like, no, actually, I do think you're going to benefit from having that context. And does it delay the opening a little bit? I guess, but also, it's sort of like you have to make choices about like what are you going to gain the most from? And I think by giving myself kind of like a second pass at really trying to tell the story, it actually did help in the sense of like just rounding it out a little bit in a way where I think it was a little too spare, like on the initial version of it that I did.
It's really cool to kind of hear the process of going through that and like how it evolved, especially from, you know, these early days of like planning and shooting and kind of getting to that point with like the MFA project, but also, you know, and I you know, commend you on this. Like we've all had those projects where just like, you know, I know that there's definitely one project that I kind of just abandon, and I feel really bad about that. We've all kind of been there where we do abandon, or we're like, maybe I don't know if I'm going to end up finishing that. A lot of times these are short films, not features. But you know, for Andrew, for you to kind of stick with it and say, okay, like there's a vision that I have for this. I've, you know, learned a lot, and I'm going to sit down and work with this and make like the best product of this that I can after learning all that. That's really awesome. So that's great. So one last question for y'all, and you know, I didn't line it up like this, but it just so happens that both of these films are not only part of our More Than Just a Funny Face block, but they're also part of our Texas short film showcase. With this, I'm always curious. Obviously, we've got very different kind of aspects of these films, you know, and what kind of role Austin and Texas plays in it. You know, Andrew, I'll start with you. You know, especially for this being like, you know, this is where you got your MFA. What does it mean to have a film, one of your films, play on the big screen in Austin?
Yeah, it's definitely significant. I think especially as somebody who did, you know, my primary relationship with Austin was through going to UT, and I had not been to Austin before I was seriously considering going to UT, and then sort of like experienced the city through that way. I mean, I think one thing I am glad and that we were encouraged to do through the program, for those KB films, for those narrative shorts that we made, was, you know, kind of like dip your toe into, you know, that's why they would have you do the documentary first and then do the narrative, because the idea was in doing the documentary, you have to go out into the city and find a subject for the most part. So, you know, you ground yourself a little bit. And I think for most filmmakers who are going through that MFA at UT, it's like sort of a handful, you know, every year or two that are Austinites. You're mostly like discovering the city as you're doing it. Certainly as well, like, you know, both of the theaters that these films are being played at are ones like that I have, you know, been an audience member in, you know, many times. And when I saw that that's where they were being played, I could see in my head, you know, where they were. So, you know, that was kind of a cool aspect as well. Especially, I mean, AFS cinema for the MFA filmmakers is kind of like, it was like a decompression spot, you know what I mean? It was where you would go. Like, I remember friends of mine who, during the time that this film would have been made, where we were like, we had a film history class that was like very early that we would take. And I remember times where we were like, okay, we're working on our short films. We got the film history class tomorrow. And then there would be some, you know, students who were like, yeah, but this, you know, this wild film is playing at AFS. Like, I have this paper on like this really old film due tomorrow, but I just want to go to AFS and like squeeze one in, you know, beforehand and whatnot. So I think that, you know, it was a learning, you know, process. And while in some ways it's always funny when I think of this film, in a way, all of my films, like many of them maybe don't portray their being in Austin or being in Texas like so overtly. But one thing that I do like to think about is that, you know, there's always signs that that's the case. Like, for instance, if you pay close attention in Dirty Laundry, there's some parts where I wasn't allowed, I don't think, to like include the full name of the laundromat in the film, you know, which is fine. But that laundromat, part of their logo on the inside had like a star that was kind of like Texas star adjacent, I would say. And you can see it in some shots, like some of the wider shots, you can see this star in the corner. And so there's just little things like that that sort of give it that Texas flavor. And, you know, it's very funny, like Angelina is originally from California, but her accent, I feel like, sounds more Texan in a way, I would say. I think she would agree. So there's just like little things like that. You know, I always like really liked in that opening shot when she's walking to the door, you know, you can see like some little like palm tree-esque kind of trees. And, you know, so it always gave me a feel of like, it's obviously it's not, you know, there's a cowboy in it. It's not like totally like the most Texan thing ever, but there's these little indicators that's like, if I had shot it here in Chicago, the trees wouldn't look like that, you know? So to me, you know, it has those identifiers of being in that place. They're like more subtle, but they were meaningful to me, especially in the sense that I was very new to Austin at that time. I don't think I'd even lived there for a year yet. So I was just sort of like absorbing and learning, but being able to go to a place like Fallout Theater, which, you know, clearly had a big impact on this space, and sort of, yeah, find a talent that was like associated with this area and work with them. Like, yeah, definitely very satisfying to be able to make a Texas film, you know, even if it's maybe a little more subtle in that identity.
That's really cool. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like when we make these films, they do kind of serve as like a time capsule. So it's cool to be able to see, you know, where you were geographically and, you know, mentally, emotionally, everything that was going on. You know, John, for you, I know, you know, you've appeared in a lot of Texas and Austin adjacent kind of shorts and features over the years. You know, so I'm not sure how often you've had the opportunity to, you know, have film festivals right there in your backyard in Austin. What does it mean to you to be able to show this film that I think is so near and dear? I'm sure, you know, you put so much right there in Austin.
You know, I don't know how things aligned. I think I'm the only Texan involved with Liverwurst. I think everybody else is a transplant. You know, Nathaniel, Spencer, Red, who I co-star with, Veronica is from Oklahoma. I don't know. Yeah, I may be the only Texan in this film that isn't set in Texas. Where, but you know, for me, it's like Austin was the first place I ever saw myself on the big screen, and it was part of the reason I moved to Austin. Was I had friends who were going to school at UT back in the 90s, and the first, you know, I came and acted in a student film, and then that film got into, oh gosh, back then I think they had a festival called Cinema Texas, and I saw myself at on the UT campus in some theater there. And then again at what is now the Mothership. This is when it was the Ritz, but not the Alamo Ritz, but when it was a nightclub called the Ritz, and the upstairs of the nightclub was a theater. And I saw myself there, and I saw myself at UT. So anytime that I can be on screen in Austin is, you know, it takes me back to those roots. You know, it takes me back to my decision to move here in the first place. You know, it was, you know, back in 1998. You know, I have personal goals this year, and my personal goals kind of tie into that, which is like, for the longest time, you know, I worked as a film critic, and, you know, I dabble with cartooning and stuff like that. And there's a desire, and this gets kind of personal. And I know I don't have any problem conveying this to people that have worked with me, but I want people to know what I can do. Like it's that simple. Like I want people to know that I can do it. It's like, I don't want to be just like, oh, John, the former film critic, or John, the cartoonist. So it's like, I want, and I feel it happening this year, but I have a very like concerted effort to changing people into thinking, oh, John, the actor. And it's like, because that's what I want to do. It's what I want to be. And, you know, for me, for this to be playing at AFS here in Austin, it's like I have, you know, most of those people that I'm talking about that have a preconceived notion of me are people that live here. they're all filmmakers that I know, or people who are doing things here that I know. And I want them to think of me, and then let me succeed or fail on my own terms. Like, you know, I'll still audition for stuff, but give me the audition. You know what I mean? Like, let me lose it. Don't just not think of me. Yeah, and so to me, this is yet another another important stop on my goal that I've kind of set for myself over the course of the next year to really make this a profession. You know, that's my hope.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's such a great performance. And for anyone who's seen you on screen before, it's not a surprise at all, because, you know, again, I can list out all these roles that I've seen you in. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased. You know, you had that scene stealing cameo, as we mentioned.
Yeah.
But also, you know, really a really powerful starring role in Brian Connolly's Make Popular Movies, just to name a few. And, you know, for both of y'all, we're really so excited to be able to showcase your movies. Andrew, John, thank you both for your time on a couple of these panels. We appreciate it, and can't wait to see you in Austin for the fest.